I'm not out to conquer women and seduce them, you know. There's more value to be had from a relationship than that, you know.
Wow.
He doesn't want us to pass his dressing room to go to the stage.
That's crazy.
He wants us to drive all the way around the venue and walk to the stage.
The fact that when she was touring with Luther, they had to have different stages.
Yes.
They had to have different entrances backstage.
Luther Vandross was an absolute legend in the world of R&B. Growing up in the Bronx, he rose to become an iconic figure in music, celebrated for his smooth, velvety voice that could move anyone. But behind all his amazing achievements, it seems Luther's life and career were packed with drama, including plenty of feuds within the industry. Let's dig a little deeper into his story. Let's start with the R&B legend Anita Baker and her rocky relationship with Luther Vandross. Both were undeniably amazing artists, dominating the airwaves with their soulful voices and timeless hits. But their connection wasn't as smooth as their music. It was more like a clash of two powerful personalities, especially when they came together for a mega tour that fans thought would be nothing short of legendary. Now, Luther Vandross was all about perfection. This man didn't just sing songs, he created experiences with every performance. He was meticulous about everything: his vocals, the stage setup, the lighting, the wardrobe. Everything had to be on point. He had an extraordinary attention to detail and wouldn't settle for anything less than excellence. Anyone working with him had to meet those sky-high standards, which wasn't always easy. On the other hand, Anita Baker was the complete opposite. She was pure emotion, pouring her heart and soul into every song. Her voice had a raw, emotional depth that could bring people to tears. But Anita didn't obsess over the technical stuff like Luther did. She followed her instincts and let her emotions lead the way, which sometimes clashed with Luther's precision-driven approach. So when the two teamed up for their tour, the world was expecting magic. After all, they were two of the biggest names in R&B at the time. Fans were thrilled at the thought of them sharing the stage, and the media hyped it up as the event of the year. But instead of harmony, what fans got was drama, a whole lot of it.
When she was touring with Luther, they had to have different stages.
Yes.
They had to have different entrances backstage.
The two butted heads over almost everything: which songs to perform, how to arrange them, even the tempo of the music. Anita's laid-back, soulful style didn't mesh with Luther's perfectionist tendencies, and the tension quickly built up. The pressure of meeting fans' high expectations didn't help either. Their contrasting styles clashed in rehearsals and spilled over backstage, creating an atmosphere that was far from friendly.
They both had demands.
That's right, honey. Luther had his girls in Bob Mackie gowns and things, honey.
And you couldn't walk Luther's way, you had to walk around.
That's right.
Did you say demands or demands?
The crew and staff had to bear the brunt of their disagreements, constantly trying to mediate and keep things running smoothly. Even fans started to notice the tension on stage. While they delivered incredible performances, there were moments where the chemistry between the two felt forced. It was clear that their dynamic wasn't as harmonious as people hoped. But when they did manage to set aside their differences, the results were absolutely stunning. The chemistry they showed during those rare moments was pure magic. Their voices blended beautifully, and their performances reminded everyone why they were legends in the first place. Despite the drama, they brought out the best in each other musically, creating unforgettable moments for their fans. Now let's talk about the legendary Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, and her fiery working relationship with Luther Vandross. If you thought two music icons like them would hit it off perfectly, think again. Turns out their time together while working on Aretha's 1983 album, Get It Right, was far from harmonious. In fact, they reportedly clashed so much that their sessions became the stuff of music industry lore. According to insiders, Aretha and Luther argued like an old married couple who couldn't agree on anything. Things got so heated at one point that Aretha actually stormed out of the studio, leaving everyone stunned. She later spilled all the tea about the situation in her autobiography, Aretha. From these roots, where she didn't hold back on her feelings, she wrote, "All of a sudden, Luther wanted to tell me how to sing. Me, the same person he had learned so much about singing from." Aretha felt Luther had crossed the line. To her, a producer's role was to guide the artist with suggestions about phrasing, diction, and melody, not to dictate how they should sing a song. In her words, if he wanted to tell the artist how to sing, why didn't he just sing it himself? This wasn't just a mild disagreement, it escalated fast. Neither Aretha nor Luther was the type to back down. The argument became a shouting match, and in true diva fashion, Aretha grabbed her coat, walked out of the studio, and kept yelling at Luther on her way out. It was a dramatic exit that made it clear she wasn't going to be told how to do her job, not even by someone as talented as Luther Vandross. But that wasn't the end of their beef. Luther later made his feelings known too. In an interview, he reportedly commented that the Aretha Franklin he had idolized as a child, the warm, soulful voice he heard on the radio, wasn't the same Aretha he encountered during their phone calls and studio sessions. It was his way of saying that working with Aretha wasn't exactly the dream he had imagined. Of course, Aretha wasn't one to let that slide. She threw some playful but pointed shade when speaking about their dynamic in an interview with Jet magazine. "When I say this, I say it with respect and in a positive way," she began diplomatically. "Luther and I really do like each other. We have a lot of mutual respect, even when we're not talking. We're still cool. I guess you could call it Aries butting heads because he's an Aries too. We're both very opinionated people." But then came the kicker. Aretha added, "He was lying at the base of his radio listening to me. I wasn't lying there listening to him." That little jab, paired with a laugh, showed that even in jest, Aretha wasn't about to let anyone forget who the real queen was. But despite their rocky start, Aretha and Luther eventually managed to patch things up. They moved past their differences and even recorded some incredible music together. Over time, their working relationship blossomed into a genuine friendship. By the time Luther passed away in 2005, Aretha considered him a dear friend and spoke warmly of their bond. Now let's talk about the legendary friendship and occasional friction between Luther Vandross and Patti LaBelle.
If only for one night, if only for one night.
These two shared a bond that was as deep as it was complicated. They were like family, but as with any close relationship, there were moments of tension. Patti has often spoken about how Luther would sometimes get upset with her, especially when she'd share a little too much about him during their private conversations or in public. Luther was a private person, and Patti's open and candid nature sometimes clashed with his desire to keep certain things under wraps. One of the most talked about moments between them happened in 2017, years after Luther had passed away. Patti nearly broke the internet when she appeared on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen and casually confirmed one of the biggest rumors about Luther's life, that he was gay. For years, this had been speculated in the music industry and among fans, but Luther had never publicly addressed it. So when Patti openly said it on live television, it caused a stir. During the interview, Patti explained that Luther struggled deeply with the idea of coming out. He didn't want to upset his mother, she shared, even though she might have known he wasn't going to come out and say it to the world. According to Patti, Luther also worried about how his fans, particularly his female fans, would react. "He told me he didn't want to upset the world," she added. "It was hard for him."
Did he struggle with the idea of coming out publicly? Was that something that you talked about at all?
He did not want his mother to be, although she might have known, but he wasn't going to come out and say this to the world. And he had a lot of lady fans, and he told me that he just didn't want to upset the world.
Patty's revelation sparked a lot of conversations, and not all of them were positive. Some people felt like she was just confirming what many already suspected. For years, rumors about Luther's preference had swirled, but he had always kept his private life exactly that, private. To many, her words weren't shocking. They were just a late acknowledgement of what had been an open secret in the music world. But not everyone was on board with Patty's decision to speak about it. Some fans and critics felt she had crossed a line by outing Luther, even posthumously. Their argument was simple. It wasn't her story to tell. They felt that Luther had made a conscious choice during his lifetime to keep his personal life out of the spotlight, and that choice should have been respected even after his passing. For these fans, Patty's disclosure felt like a betrayal of the trust and friendship she shared with Luther.
Luther's been gone for about 12 years now, okay? Luther never publicly came out of the closet, despite the rumors. It's not okay to talk about it when it's your best friend. You know, it's like a violation.
The whole idea of outing someone is a pretty sensitive topic, especially within the LGBTQ community. It's not just a question of breaching someone's privacy. Historically, outing someone could put their safety, reputation, and even their life at risk. LGBTQ individuals have faced all kinds of challenges, ridicule, discrimination, and even violence, just for being true to themselves. Even today, when society has come a long way in terms of acceptance and civil rights, coming out is still a deeply personal decision. It takes courage and is something only the individual should control. For someone like Luther Vandross, the stakes were even higher. Being Black and gay adds layers of complexity that a lot of people don't fully understand. In Luther's case, he was navigating the height of his career in the 1980s, a time when being openly gay, especially as a Black man in the music industry, wasn't just rare, it was practically unheard of. Back then, the world was a lot less forgiving. The R&B and soul music scene was not only hyper-masculine, but also deeply connected to the African-American church and broader cultural ideas about gender and sexuality. Homophobia was rampant, and traditional ideas about masculinity dominated the narrative. For someone like Luther, coming out publicly wasn't just a personal risk, it could have meant the end of his career. You have to imagine the kind of inner conflict Luther must have been dealing with. On one hand, there's the natural desire to live authentically and not feel like you have to hide who you are. On the other hand, there's the fear of what might happen if the world knew. Would his fans still love him? Would his community turn its back on him? Would the industry that had helped him reach the top suddenly shut its doors? These are questions that no one should ever have to ask themselves, but for Luther, they were very real fears. Luther Vandross wasn't just any artist. He was an icon, a symbol of romance and passion in the R&B world. He wasn't just known for his voice, he was a full-on S symbol. Women adored him, and his songs often revolved around love and heartbreak, themes that resonated deeply with his fans. To many, he was the ideal romantic figure. If Luther had come out, it wouldn't have just been personal, it would have sent shockwaves through his career and community. It's hard to overstate just how big of a deal it would have been in that era. He wasn't just a Black man in America, he was a Black man in a genre and community where there was little to no space for openly gay men, let alone someone at his level of fame. While the pop world had stars like Boy George and Elton John, who were breaking barriers around sexual identity in their own ways, Luther Vandross didn't have any similar role models in the world of R&B. If he had chosen to come out, he would have been walking a lonely, uncharted path as one of the first openly gay Black artists in a genre where masculinity and image were so heavily scrutinized. It wasn't just about homophobia, though. That was a huge part of it. He would have also been up against the additional challenges of racism, both within and outside the LGBTQ community, and the pressures that came with being a Black man in the spotlight. For male R&B singers, the expectations were clear. They were supposed to be heartthrobs, the ultimate fantasy for their female fans. Luther, with his buttery smooth voice and those romantic ballads that could melt hearts, fit perfectly into that mold. His music wasn't just entertainment. It was a soundtrack for love, weddings, breakups, and everything in between. Fans saw him as the man who could express emotions they couldn't put into words themselves. But the idea of him publicly identifying as gay? That might have shattered the illusion for many, jeopardizing his appeal and, by extension, his commercial success. It wasn't just about how fans would react. It was also about the music industry itself, which has always been laser-focused on image. Being openly gay in R&B wasn't just a risk. It could have been career suicide back then. Luther seemed to understand this deeply. Over the years, he never publicly confirmed or denied the rumors about his sexuality. In a 2001 interview with Vibe, he even joked about the speculation, deflecting in a way that only he could. When asked about his preferences, he quipped, "Am I bi-coastal? Yeah, I have houses in Beverly Hills in New York." But behind the humor, there was a hint of vulnerability. Luther admitted, "I know that I'm paying a price for being so private, and I do wonder if it's worth it." He seemed torn between protecting his personal life and the toll that his silence might have been taking on him emotionally. Of course, his decision to keep his private life under wraps didn't stop the rumors. If anything, it fueled them. There were persistent whispers about him having AIDS, which escalated to an outrageous and false report in 2000, claiming he had died from the disease. You can imagine how that kind of speculation would make anyone hesitant to open up. For Luther, the world didn't seem like a safe or welcoming place for someone in his position to come out. At the end of the day, Luther wasn't asking for much. Like anyone else, he wanted love and happiness. But that too seemed to elude him. In the same Vibe interview, he revealed something deeply personal. He had never been in love. "I'm still waiting," he said. "The time that I've spent being in love has never been reciprocated. Those are just the circumstances." His first experience with unrequited love happened when he was just 16. He opened his heart to someone only to hear, "Thank you, but I'm not interested." That kind of rejection leaves a mark, especially at such a young age. Luther described it as very painful, unrequited, and alienating. Very alienating. It was clear that those early experiences stayed with him, shaping the way he approached relationships and love. "I want to play house," he said wistfully in the interview. "I want somebody who's not on payroll to care about where I am." It's heartbreaking to think about, isn't it? A man whose voice brought so much joy, whose songs were the backdrop to countless love stories, never really got to experience the kind of love he sang about. It's hard not to feel the weight of the irony there. Luther Vandross, the man who made millions believe in love with his music, spent much of his life yearning for a connection he couldn't quite find. He gave the world so much of himself, his talent, his heart, his emotions. But in return, he struggled to simply be seen and accepted for who he truly was. Whether or not Luther ever found that fairy tale love before his passing, we'll never really know. Now let's switch gears to another of Luther Vandross's famous feuds, this time with the powerhouse R&B girl group, En Vogue. These ladies were riding high in the 90s with their fresh, modern R&B style. They were the epitome of what was hot at the time, the complete opposite of Luther's classic, old-school vibes. Pairing them together for a tour might have sounded exciting on paper, but in reality, it was like trying to mix oil and water, messy and complicated. It was rumored that Luther called the police on them just because they walked past his dressing room.
Wow.
He doesn't want us to pass his dressing room to go to the stage.
That's crazy.
He wants us to drive all the way around the venue and walk to the stage.
The tension was there right from the start. Luther had a very specific way of doing things. He was a perfectionist to his core, and he expected everyone around him to follow his lead. Meanwhile, En Vogue was all about bringing youthful energy and their own creative flair to the stage. They had their own rhythm and approach, which often clashed with Luther's carefully crafted routines. They couldn't seem to find common ground on anything, from the set list to rehearsal schedules. One of the most talked about whispers was that Luther wasn't thrilled with the amount of attention En Vogue was getting as his opening act. Let's be honest. En Vogue was on fire at the time. They were young, fresh, and exciting, and they brought a lot of energy to the stage.
And for the longest, we had no idea what the problem was, and we were begging, "Mr. Vandross, can you please tell us what we did so we can apologize for it, because we have no idea what it is that we did."
But despite the tension, the show had to go on, and both Luther and En Vogue knew they had a job to do. When the lights went down and the music started, something magical would occasionally happen. Luther's smooth, velvety voice blended surprisingly well with En Vogue's energetic harmonies. It was like two different worlds coming together to create something truly special. In those rare moments of harmony, you could see the brilliance of their collaboration. Their performances, though rare in synergy, offered glimpses of what could have been if they'd found a way to truly work together. Another talked about was his rumored rivalry with Whitney Houston. During their peak years in the 80s and 90s, both Luther and Whitney were dominating the charts with their iconic ballads. Luther had long been recognized as one of the kings of emotional, soul-stirring songs. But when Whitney emerged as a powerhouse known for her soaring vocals and unforgettable hits, some speculated that Luther felt overshadowed. It didn't help when Whitney turned down a duet proposal from him in the late 80s, leaving him disappointed. Despite this, there's no solid evidence of a feud, just a hint of unfulfilled potential for what could have been an unforgettable collaboration between two vocal giants. Publicly, both artists praised each other's work, and there was mutual respect. Another artist Luther had a brush with was Diana Ross. Early in his career, Luther worked as a background vocalist and arranger for Diana, and their time together was, at times, tense. Luther's perfectionism was well known, and he expected things to be done with a level of precision and detail that often clashed with Diana's more relaxed, laid-back approach to studio work. While Diana never openly discussed the friction, it was clear that their styles didn't always mesh, and it left a lasting impression. For Luther, getting things just right was more than a preference. It was an art form, and he expected nothing less from the artists he worked with. Another famous name Luther was often compared to, and occasionally frustrated by, was Michael Jackson. Michael's dominance in the pop world was undeniable, and his rise to fame overshadowed many other artists, including R&B acts like Luther. Vandross had strong opinions about the state of the industry, particularly when it came to how lighter-skinned Black artists seemed to receive more mainstream attention. This wasn't necessarily a dig at Michael, but more of a commentary on the way the industry seemed to favor a certain image. Luther believed that talent should be the sole deciding factor, not appearance or popularity contests. While there was never a direct feud with Michael, Luther's frustration with the industry's bias toward lighter-skinned artists occasionally seeped into interviews and conversations. His honest takes on the lack of recognition for darker-skinned artists sometimes hinted at his unease with how the media and industry handled these dynamics. Despite these tensions, Luther Vandross's legacy remains incredibly influential. His voice transcended genres and boundaries, and his impact on R&B and soul music continues to thrive today.